Welcome to the Character Sheet, comic books' official home for all things tabletop and fantasy. I am Christian Hoffer, and today I am joined by a very special guest to talk about a very special project. I am here with Carlos Cabrera. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm pretty good. Thank you for having me, man.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And today we are here to talk about the upcoming Welcome to Night Vale RPG, which is being published by Renegade Studios. The backer kit crowdfunding campaign will launch on October 1st, and we are here to hear a little bit more about the project. So, Welcome to Night Vale, obviously a very famous podcast that's kind of like surreal. Like, I don't want to call it fantasy, it's more like sci-fi. God builds in all these like levels of meta humor into it. So my first question is, why turn Welcome to Night Vale into an RPG?
Well, it started with members of Renegade just being really, really big fans of the podcast themselves. I was introduced to the podcast, I think, back in 2013 by some roommates I had at the time. And I think everyone who's touched the project has been fans of Welcome to Night Vale in some form. And they brought me onto the project about November of last year. I've been working on it ever since, but it's just so rich in lore and story that it was a really, really good place for an RPG, I think.
Okay. So, for those of you, I was going to say readers. I'm like, no, wait, we're a YouTube channel. And then I said listeners, but wait, we're a YouTube channel. So for those viewers who haven't seen or listened to Welcome to Night Vale, it's a podcast set in the town of Night Vale. Could you like describe like the setting a little bit for us? Because obviously, like some weird stuff goes down in
Yeah.
this town.
So Night Vale is a small desert town where basically every conspiracy theory is true. It delves a lot into the mysteries of what happens to all of the residents of the town, all of the mysteries around the surrounding area, both in the town and the desert. And it really leans into like the suspense and the mystery of all of these crazy things, basically all happening at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. So the RPG itself, like what will players do in the RPG? Because usually there's like big campaigns, like I think of something like, for instance, like let's say the Transformers RPG. I'm going to play as a Transformer. I'm probably going to fight the Decepticons in a story. But Night Vale's a lot more surreal. So like what are players actually going to be like playing through? What are the sort of stories that they would do in this RPG?
So in the RPG, it takes a really like investigative bent. I would
Okay.
say um, X Files meets a little bit more of the odd, basically.
Okay. Yeah.
So you are even in the starting adventure that we're offering in the Backer Kit campaign. You are members of the town. Either you are recently arrived or you've lived there for a while, and you're trying to investigate what's happening to the signal for Night Vale Community Radio. And you start exploring at behest of the main character, Cecil Palmer, who narrates the entire show,
Mhm.
about what's happening with this radio station and going to various places that you've heard about in the podcast and seeing exactly what's going on with the town. So it's sort of like a very, very gumshoe type play, but with all of the things that happen in Night Vale and the creepy and the weird and sometimes the downright lethal, you could just be on an investigation and not sure if you're making it back alive. The interns of Night Vale Radio have very famously a very high turnover rate.
They do. And that was going to lead into my next question, because Night Vale does have a surprisingly high body count for
Mhm.
for that podcast. So, is this kind of like, is this like the equivalent of like a Mork Borg, but set in a small desert town? Like is this a lethal RPG?
Yeah, so it's definitely more lethal than some of the other Essence 20 campaigns or game settings that Renegade has. So, comparatively speaking, the books will actually prepare you for things that might even be a little bit higher than your average level and
Mhm.
suggest on ways that you can actually deal with that. But it fully explains what could potentially happen, whether you are, encountering a creature like a librarian who might be a little bit more than you were bargained for, or say happen to be in a vehicle and get jumped by a deer who, if they collide with your car, can shift you to a different timeline. And basically how to deal with all the crazy stuff like that in the game.
That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. So you mentioned obviously that there's different levels and stuff like this. So this isn't like a sort of game where, because Night Vale is, has 1 foot, I will say, like maybe a half foot set in the real world. And obviously us normal average J people don't really average up and get more HP or something like that. But you mentioned that there's levels. So let's talk a little bit about how this translates with the Essence 20 system. Like, why did you guys decide to use like the Essence 20 system, which for those of you who don't know is the same system that GI Joe, Transformers, and My Little Pony. So it's obviously an adaptable system because all 3 of those all can be run through the same game system. But why did you decide to use the system instead of like creating a new one?
Well, not only is there just some amazing crossover opportunities there's already been a lot of great ideas running through the Renegade Discord on how to combine some of these other properties with Night Vale, which have been great. But I always find that the Essence 20 system is a really good balance between your classic D20 games like, D&D and Pathfinder, and also dice pool storytelling games like World of Darkness and everything that entails. So it's sort of like a nice little balance between the two where you can still tell a lot of freeform stories and basically applicable to all sorts of IPs that I think really fits well with Essence 20.
Okay. What sort of classes can we see kind of come out of Welcome to Night Vale in terms of the RPG? You mentioned a couple of them, like I'm assuming like a librarian, maybe an intern, things like that. Or are those like what the classes are, like different professions within Night Vale, or?
Yeah, so the way that the Essence 20 system works, you have your roles, your origins, and your influences. And your roles are effectively your largest staple to what you're probably more familiar with class-based systems.
Mm-hmm.
But you have things like there is a soldier who might be a veteran of the Blood Space War. You also have a farmer. Everybody knows who you are because you're just the man about town. And there's other things like you could be an intern, but that's more of a origin rather than
Okay.
a role. But each role also has specific focuses. So you could be a journalist role, and you could focus on whether that means radio or television and things like that.
Okay. Okay. So that, I mean, that obviously is a much more flexible than being set. One of the things that I always kind of dislike for RPGs is that sometimes they just like they keep very set classes where like I'm, for instance, a journalist, but that's not all I am. And
Yeah.
it would really suck if I was just like, oh no, he's the journalist class, and it's like 95% of my life skills have nothing to do with journalism. So
Yeah.
I think that's a much smarter system.
Yeah,
So
we've even seen previous actual plays already where someone was playing a soldier, but their actual occupation was a cable installer.
that's perfect. Absolutely amazing. So obviously this RPG, was born out of love for the podcast. It's obviously meant to appeal to fans of the podcast. If I know nothing about Welcome to Night Vale, is it still something that I can play?
Yes, one of the volumes in the book we're calling the Visitor's Guide. And that's
Hmm.
basically your in-character introduction to some of the famous hotspots, points of culture in Night Vale, and even some of the residents and NPCs you'll find around town. It's basically your volume of sort of like your welcome brochure to what Night Vale is all about, and
Hmm.
talks about all the various places and things you might actually encounter there. That was sort of like the best resource, even for me working on the game, because the podcast has been around since 2012, I think, when it started.
Yeah.
So instead of having to re-listen to all of those episodes over again, I could go directly into the visitor's guide, which was already prepped when I came on board, and just dive right into some of my favorite locations and just start doing story hooks from there.
That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Uh, is there anything that should surprise Welcome to Night Vale fans that will appear in this RPG?
So the person I believe who did the majority of the work on the Visitor's Guide is Bree Williams, who actually writes for the Welcome to Night Vale team.
Hmm.
And the Night Vale team has been a part of the entire process. So all of our game books and documents go through an approval process with them just to make sure that we're hitting the right tone and getting all of our facts straight. So we've been working hand in hand with those guys throughout the entire process of the game.
Okay, that's pretty awesome. And you mentioned game books, so
Mhm.
we probably should have covered this a little bit earlier. What exactly, are you planning to publish to support this RPG?
So the Welcome to Night Vale game is going to come as a box set. One of the things that Renegade's really been paying attention to is the fan feedback from their other IPs in the SS20 system. A lot of people have said that they want to try new IPs in Essence 20 for RPGs, but some of the previous games like Transformers or GI Joe, for example, the core rule books are kind of written for people who are already familiar with things like
Yeah.
D&D. So for Night Vale, we're actually breaking up what's effectively a core rule book in 4 separate volumes. So we have the Visitor's Guide, which is the setting companion. We have the Citizen's Guide, which is the player-facing character creation book, the Host Guide for GMs, and then there's also the Adventure.
Hmm.
And also
So
in the box, you'll find your dice set with a couple of Backer Kit exclusives, of course, and then some handout threat sheets, creatures and wildlife from Night Vale that you might encounter during your game that aren't just, specific to the adventure. And unlike the boxes that we're offering for Transformers and GI Joe, there's actually going to be a way you can level your characters up to 5, so that you can start off with the box and already have
mhm.
the tool set to continue with the story and bring those characters to life a little bit further down the road.
So another perk to the Essence 20 RPGs that Renegade does, Transformers, GI Joe, My Little Pony, they've all been supported for a long time. You've been putting out books for those games for quite some time. Is there a timeline in place for like a roadmap in place for Welcome to Night Vale, or is this just going to be like kind of a one-off project? Or will there be annual releases kind of like in the same vein as the other Essence 20 projects?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, what you'll see when the backer kit launches October 1st is
Mhm.
that there will be stretch goals to produce even more content for the game coming out in the future. So there'll
Okay.
be more pre-generated characters, more adventure hooks, more content. And personally, I would love to work on, writing more Night Vale content. So if the backer kit even does really, really well and everyone shows up for it, then we're hoping to support that in the future too.
Okay. And since we're talking about the backer kit,
Yeah.
what are some of the levels that folks can like jump into? I know backer kit's not quite like the same as Kickstarter where there's like set pledge levels, but if I remember correctly, there are, there are certain like levels that you can support the campaign at.
Yeah, so there are a few pledge levels as well as the stretch goals. So there's going to be a digital only version that you can apply just to get the PDFs. There's going to be the basic box, which contains the 4 books: the
Mhm.
Host Guide, Citizen's Guide, Visitor's Guide, and Adventure. And then that will also include the physical handouts for the threats, the physical handouts for the pre-generated characters, and then
Mhm.
also a dice set. And if you pledge to the Backer Kit campaign, you'll also get a Backer Kit exclusive second dice set. And then if you go with the deluxe, you'll even get the third Kickstarter or Backer Kit dice set, as well as the dice bag and dice tray.
So final question.
Mm,
Uh, for like a final pitch on why folks should check this out, like we've kind of talked about what the campaign is, what why the game kind of differs from the podcast, how it appeals to the podcast. Is there a favorite thing that you have about this project that people should definitely go and back so they can check it out?
So, what I think characters, or what I think the fans were really going to like, is some of your favorite characters showing up from Night Vale.
Hmm.
A good portion of the main cast will show up as NPCs that you'll be able to use, and you'll even meet a couple of them in the adventure that we created from the box. So, right out of the gate, you're playing with your fan favorite characters to figure out what's going on with this crazy little town. But I think my personal favorite thing that I've probably done on the game is fleshed out what the dice look like I got
Okay.
to decide what the clicky clacks look like. And the Welcome to Night Vale RPG uses a skill specifically for the Night Vale system called the Weird skill. So it's kind of like what the independent skill was for like using magic in My Little Pony, for example.
Okay.
But the weird skill is something that you can put your skill points into to specifically interface with all the crazy things that happen in town.
Oh my God. So
Yes.
like if I have a high like weird scale score, I can just kind of like slot in and not only maybe survive but thrive in some like I too can participate in like the hooded figures meetings and whatnot that happen in
You
this
too
town.
can be a little bit weird and interface with the world of Night Vale in a very special way.
That's amazing. I can't wait to hear more about that. So obviously, the backer kit for this launches on October 1st.
Mhm.
Welcome to Night Vale. If you haven't listened to this podcast, I highly encourage it. It's one of the weirder and wilder podcasts. It's been around for a decade, and yet it still captures this like very unique, surreal, weird experience that's just really like it's kind of hard to describe other than the fact that it's really effing weird in a cool way. Like I have a smile on my face whenever I listen to it, and not too many podcasts can make me do that, especially considering how just absolutely just I can say this now because we're like 15 minutes in, especially considering how absolute batshit crazy the podcast gets. It's very surreal. It's very crazy, and I mean that in the best possible way. And I can't wait to see how the RPG adapts that. Any final thoughts before we let you go, Carlos?
You can sign up to the Backer Kit landing page right now to get notified as soon as that launches on October 1st. And we would love to have you and share our stories with you. It's been a lot of fun.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for appearing on the show. We very much appreciate your time. We can't wait to check out Welcome to Night Vale once again on BackerKit October 1st. Be sure also check out Renegade's other RPGs. They actually make some really solid RPGs. Not only are they one of the they're the publisher of the World of Darkness RPGs. In addition to all these great Essence 20 RPGs, the Transformer RPG, GI Joe, My Little Pony, which is actually very solid. Like the guys do a really hell of a job with My Little Pony, which
Power Rangers
words
2?
that yeah, words I never thought that. What was
Yeah.
that?
Power Rangers
Yeah.
2.
Oh, I totally forgot about Power Rangers. How could I forget about Power Rangers? Like one of like the shining jewels there. Like absolutely fantastic stuff. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Be sure to follow Renegade if you want more details. Check out the backer kit. It's available. You can check out the newsletter now. That's all for us for today. So thank you very much for your time and thanks for watching.
Thank you.